when I was a chef, right, your idea is of those Gordon Ramsay kitchens where like people are shouting at each other. And I have this it's like a boss idea of leadership. And then when I got into the farming industry, it softened me up a lot more because people were much more welcoming and happy.
Hi everyone, my name's Michelle Grant and this is the Grateful Podcast, a place where we explore how we can eat, live and lead for a more sustainable world. On today's episode, I'm taking you all the way to the Philippines to chat with the amazing Louise Mabulo. Now, you probably won't realize it when you hear Louise speak, but she's actually just 23 years old. I kept seeing her face pop up in my LinkedIn feed as we share a few contacts in common, and at first I wasn't sure if she's a chef or a farmer or an entrepreneur or an activist, and the answer is she's all of the above. Louise actually started her journey with food as a budding young chef. She was a finalist on Junior MasterChef, and it was in the kitchen that she became really fascinated by the story behind the ingredients that she was cooking with. This eventually led her to set up the Cacao project, a project which helps to mitigate climate change by helping farmers access more resilient crops and production systems and supporting them to build sustainable livelihoods. The Cacao project has trained more than 200 farmers in diverse agroforestry techniques in the San Fernando area. It's planted over 70,000 trees across 70 hectares of land, implemented more environmentally friendly pest and fertilization techniques, and also restored 2 water sources in the area. And the hard work of Louise to set this up and to make an impact is really getting noticed. She's a Forbes Asia 30 under 30 list maker. She's a United Nations Environment Program Young Champion of the Earth. She won Outstanding Farmer of the Year in 2018 in the Philippines. And as a chef, she's won a Best Dessert in Asia award. And as I mentioned earlier, this all started when she was a finalist on Junior MasterChef. I found Louise's story of how she integrates these different worlds of being a chef and a farmer and an activist and an entrepreneur really fascinating. And I'm sure that you'll find her energy and her enthusiasm as inspiring as I did. To get our conversation started, I asked Louise if she could tell us a bit more about her upbringing and how that's influenced this interesting journey that she's taken from the kitchen to the fields.
I grew up in the UK to, of course, a Filipino family, and to us, being in the kitchen was like being in the living room. Basically, we were always cooking all the time, every single day, and that smell was wafting out of the kitchen, and it's just a really fond memory. And when we moved back to the Philippines, it was a matter of rediscovering my roots, rediscovering heirloom recipes. And I just really enjoyed having fun with my grandmother, my mom, and my dad, just cooking every single day. That caught the attention of some people who were kind of scouting for young people who were cooking at the Junior MasterChef cooking competition television show. And they identified me because I'd always post about the food that I cooked on Facebook, which was new at the time. And I ended up in this show and I was one of the finalists. I think I was 4th runner up. And it was this jumping board into a really, really early culinary career for someone like me. I was 12 years old. I was already doing cooking demonstrations and guesting on television shows, and people were dubbing me as this culinary prodigy. And I participated in competitions as I grew up. I won medals and Best Dessert in Asia award. And it was this really jam-packed childhood where I was growing up training under the best chefs, and it was very privileged to have those opportunities. But I realized that there were issues within the food systems that I could identify because I was so exposed to it, especially in the Philippines, where a lot of our suppliers were disappearing and a lot of our farmers were getting impacted by either old age or just really by unfair supply chains. And it was quite concerning for someone like me, and I didn't know what exactly to do about it. So I started off with an advocacy of farm-to-table cuisine. I tried growing my own ingredients, and as well as sourcing everything from local farmers and spreading awareness about where ingredients come from and the process that gets them to your table and that story behind all of the ingredients and dishes that come together. But it was in 2016 that my town was hit by Super Typhoon Knock 10 that was really the turning point that got me to start the Cacao project, which was much more involved with farmers and got me to kind of be proud and label myself as a farmer as well as a chef, and really bridge that divide between consumers and producers in our food system.
Tell me more about the Cacao project and how it was responding to that very pivotal event for you, this typhoon in your local town.
So the super typhoon Not 10, it destroyed 80% of agricultural land in my town. And that was devastating for our town because most of the people here, their livelihoods depend on farming, agriculture, food production. And so it meant that for months and even years, people would struggle to have a decent livelihood, decent income source. And reinstating that was an even bigger trouble. And that would actually underpin a lot of social issues like crime and theft and food insecurity that would come up in the next years. So the Cacao project really initially began as a typhoon relief effort. We were giving away seeds, we were giving away crops that people could plant to reinstate their livelihoods as soon as possible in a short span of time. And I realized that doing this post-typhoon was just a short-term solution to a bigger problem, which was climate change impacting our town, having worse and worse super typhoons. Typhoons and rainy season are quite normal in my region, but every year we've been seeing increasing intensities that people are actually quite surprised by how vast the devastation is to the people here and to their income sources. And the recovery was taking longer and longer each year. So we decided that we had to address a more critical issue, which was how we actually perceive the system of how we farm and do agriculture. Now, if you ask the farmers here why they farm their coconuts, rice, corn, whatever it is they're growing, it's because that's all they learned or that's all they've been doing for years and years. And they never thought about whether that economically sound for them in the next few years or whether that was adaptable and resilient, especially since they lost a lot of their profits at the end of every single year. So we thought of changing the model to make it more resilient. And that involved agroforestry, integrating new crops that had higher demand. So the Cacao project was born because we noticed that cocoa was one of the first things to regenerate after typhoons. And it was one of the crops that had a market, were more sustainable, and could actually work well within our ecosystems. And of course, on top of that, we have other things that we intercrop with it, like bok choy, okra, eggplants, pumpkins, cucumbers, and all those different things that you can grow to make this more holistic food system that would actually give them like short-term, long-term income sources and would give them a lot more security in the aftermath of typhoons and better prepare them before typhoons as well.
Mm. And how old were you when you started this project?
I think I was 18 years old when I started the project, so quite young.
Mm. Yeah, very young. I can imagine at that age, a lot of kids are maybe still in school and worrying about all kinds of other things. So what do you think made you take action or made you act differently to other people that age who might have seen the same things happening around them?
I think for me, it was for one, I had a lot of experience in food systems because I started a really early career in culinary. So I was more aware of social issues because I was just in the middle of it in creating these food and finding suppliers and talking to farmers and how I was hosting pop-up dinners. And another part of it was also the social cultural perspective. I grew up in the UK. And, their farmers are quite well respected. They're well off. Their trade is dignified. But you go to the Philippines and it's the complete opposite. We're an agricultural country. But the perspective of farmers is that they're either associated to poverty, that they lack good education, or that they are some of the most vulnerable groups. And I found that extremely problematic in a country that relies on these people for most of its economy and for most of its food. And these people aren't being treated fairly, they're not being paid well, and they're not being provided with education and skills training. So I think that idea of mine that I didn't have to come forward with those stigmas, I didn't have those ideas of associations to farmers in my mind, it helped me understand and kind of approach that whole industry in a more meaningful way without thinking of, the cultural perspective that young people wouldn't go into farming because, this isn't a good career choice, it's not profitable, or it impacts your social standing, basically. And I didn't really consider that going into it. I just wanted to be able to help in a meaningful, holistic way.
Oh, wonderful. And I think I read that you were homeschooled. Is that correct?
Yes, I was homeschooled for most of my childhood through high school. And even through university, I went through Open University. So most of the time was just really self-learning.
Yeah, I'm interested between that and this link to taking action. I wonder if you see anything there, how it kind of positioned you to, take such initiative as you did.
Oh, yeah, I think so, because I was always taught not to limit learning into the four corners of your classroom. And if there's something that you wanted to do, you had to figure it out for yourself. And, when education is in your hands, it's a huge responsibility to a young person to actually balance that and figure things out on your own. So for me, life was a constant learning process. And learning about agriculture, about food, farming, and food systems, that was something that I just really invested myself into without being prompted to do so. And so being homeschooled taught me to have the initiative to step forward. And if I saw a problem, I had to do something about it and not just leave it, oh, like someone's going to fix that, or it's something that will solve itself. I thought, no, someone has to step forward and actually find a solution to that. And that person had to be me, because that's just how I was like hotwired to think. But yeah, being homeschooled was a really great opportunity to help me develop a sense of initiative, time management, which was really huge for me at the time, and also project building on my own, and then also eventually learning to communicate with people without those social barriers of, like, oh, I shouldn't be doing that because I'm a young person.
Mm-hmm.
I was always taught that age wasn't an issue when it came to problem solving.
Yeah, and I can imagine in that environment, you also interact with people from many different generations and many different backgrounds, and that could imagine helped you in that process as well.
Oh, it did, especially in my country where there's a bit of a divide between young people and the older generation. And it was a matter of striking the balance between that, because of course in Southeast Asia especially, we're taught to revere and respect and honor elders, and that's still very important, and that's an important value to keep. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to speak up, and you shouldn't be afraid to actually propose change and work closely with them as partners and colleagues to find intergenerational collaboration towards a better solution that melds both traditional knowledge with modern perspectives and approaches.
I think there's so much to learn from when I look at the young activists and advocates that we have out in the world at the moment, tackling all these huge challenges. And I wonder how you see that. What do you think the older generation can learn from young activists, and also vice versa? What do you think younger activists can learn from this older generation who's been trying to tackle these problems for a long time, but perhaps in different ways?
Oh, there's a lot of things, especially in my project. I think one of the things that I mistakenly did in the very beginning was approach us with too much idealism and too much ideas of modernization. And eventually I realized it had to be a combination of both tradition and modern ideas. So for, I think, older generations, something that they can get from young people is we can be your technological intermediaries and be a bridge for knowledge and build these new systems, because young people are they kind of rebel against existing systems and question all of these things that have always been done. But really, it's just to find a system that works, because we realize that a lot of the models that were done in the past were quite broken. And I think young people as well can actually implement things that a lot of older people either have tried in the past, but either needed more resources to do, because young people now, we're so connected. We have technology. We have all of these resources at the tips of our fingers that we can take advantage of. And so now is a whole different game from how it was 50 years ago. But on the other hand, for young people, we have a lot to learn from older generations, because once upon a time, farming was just farming and food was just food. And people didn't think of all of these interconnectivities between all of these things. But once upon a time, food was actually intrinsically sustainable. And, biodiversity was something that was well preserved. And there were a lot of these indigenous and traditional techniques that people had that were extremely important, but are dying away because young people are either not taught about them, or they're just being phased out because of technology and the Industrial Revolution, which I think can easily be brought back if we just act as torchbearers of that knowledge and learn how to meld it with new information. Like here in the Philippines, we have a lot of elders who would know the weather by just looking at the sky and actually have weather predictions for the next week, or they would understand based on the soil what kind of content was in it, or they would whistle and then the wind would come, which was absolutely magical. And it's these bits of traditional knowledge that I think we need to continue to preserve and actually combine with modern technology. So usually if I look at the sunset, I'll know what weather it is by the color of the sunset. But then I would also check on, for example, there's this website called windy.com that would tell me if there's typhoons or rains up ahead. And, hopefully there's ways that we can integrate scientific research to prove all of these things that our elders have been doing and use it for more regenerative and more holistic solutions that combine this knowledge in a really good, meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's what you're trying to do with the Cacao project as well. Could you take me through it? Imagine I've come to visit you and you are walking me through your farm. Who would I meet? What would I see? What would I see on the ground as an impact from this project that has been running now for, five years, right?
Well, almost 5 years.
Almost 5 years, yeah.
Well, of course, if you go to the ground, I would take you to our kind of HQ, which is our model farm. And you would probably see a dirt road running in the middle of nowhere with mountains that are rolling as far as I can see and really lush green forest canopies. And there's definitely there's lots of wild birds that just, it's constant chatter. You would think that being in the middle of nature, in the middle of a farm, would be quite quiet, but there's constant noise from the biodiversity, which is really absolutely amazing. And you would see cocoa trees, kind of short, small, person-sized trees just fluttering in the middle of a farm. You see a lot of coconut trees and all of these different plants growing around. And you would have to be careful where you stepped, because there's always pumpkins and cucumbers and things that are just fallen about, and coconuts on the ground. And I guess you would see some of these beautiful pods that look like Christmas ornaments or Christmas orbs, but really they're actually cocoa pods, which are going to be turned and processed into chocolate on our on-site chocolate processing facility, where you'll actually see the process of what makes chocolate go from bean to bar. So if you open up a cocoa pod, you'll find these beans inside, and it's quite sour. It tastes like mangosteens, and it looks nothing like chocolate that we know it as a bar. But after some fermenting, sun drying, roasting, and processing, it becomes the more familiar chocolate. And you would actually see that all on the ground right now, which is brilliant. And you would, of course, if the weather is right and if you come at the right time in the morning, you'll actually meet some of the farmers who are just brilliant people who we consider them partners and, thought partners, and people who have so many ideas. And now that they've realized the possibility of agroforestry and their value to things, they come forward with new ideas and new experiments that they've tried on the ground in making different products. We're trying to make cocoa vinegar. And we're also trying to make textiles out of the leaves. And it's just really, really exciting to see the ideation and creation that you would hear from them.
That's amazing. And I think it's great you do so much value adding on site, because that's very unusual, particularly in chocolate, right? Where it's
That's right.
it's sold as this commodity, and all of value adding typically happens in another part of the world. What other things have you found have been really important to raise the perceived value of farmers in your community and in your country?
That's a really important topic. Like I mentioned before, that farmers experience a lot of stigmas that were deeply rooted from our colonial history and from how these industries are actually spoken about. Something that we've been doing is, first of all, the education systems on the ground in schools. We've worked with this university group that worked on school books that created role models for children. They made a caricature about me and the Cacao project story to give students a good example of what successful farming can be, and that this is a job that you can aspire for. Because those schools, if you're failing as a young student, usually teachers will tell you that if you fail this class, then you'll end up as a sweet potato farmer or a water spinach farmer. And that's quite problematic, because young people immediately associate farming to poverty and failure. But now we're trying to change that by showing them that, you can be successful in a green job. You can be an environmentalist. You can be a person who helps develop communities through agriculture and through farming. And that's really important for them to know. Another thing is we go to universities and teach them about the value of young people in agriculture and how it's more of an entrepreneurial aspect, that you can go through it with a business approach rather than just, farming for the sake of farming, which is what a lot of people have been doing in the past. And we also show them how much they would earn from, for example, farming on a small plot of land in the provinces versus how much they would earn at an entry-level job in the city, which is what most young people are doing. They want to study, to move to a city, to get a desk job. But the problem is now the situation in our cities is that the cost of living is higher than their salary, and it takes a lot of toll to their health, their mental health, their well-being, as opposed to being in the provinces and helping develop your community and actually getting into farming in a more entrepreneurial sense. So we open the possibilities up to that. And also another thing that we've been doing is showing people that farming isn't isolated to being out in the field and the sunlight. Of course, it's part of it. And, like planting rice, it's one part of it, but you can also help through design, through arts, through music, through finance. And there's so many ways that you can positively contribute to the community beyond the traditional idea of what farming is.
Mm, that's so nice. And what role have you seen these farmer field schools playing in changing people's perception of what is possible?
So we'd recently launched a farmer field school as well here, I think that was about last week. And what we're doing is we're teaching them about entrepreneurship, about finance management, and we're working closely with the local government to help provide resources to people with existing farms, and also with our Department of Trade and Industry, so that they can actually get all the right paperwork to formalize their farms as a business and look at it from a business aspect of securing markets, going to trade fairs, packaging, producing, because a lot of the farmers here have either worked with middlemen who just get the raw product at a low price without informing them of what the actual value of their crops are. So these farmer field skills, we teach them about the value of their crops, how to kind of gauge whether, what markets, what seasons they need to plant these things at, and also how to manage their finances, both for their families and also for their farm as a business. So there's different ways that they can approach that. And also kind of showing them different aspects. You can sell raw products, you can sell these processed products, you can do all of these value adding and special skills that would improve upon it. And also for resiliency and typhoon preparation, now that we see our climate is changing quite a bit, they need those knowledge for preparing for these increasing intensities of typhoons, as we know that they will come, whether or not we're ready for them.
Mm. So we've talked a lot about your kind of time in the field and what you do on the farm, but you actually seem to span a lot of different worlds. So sometimes you're in the kitchen as a chef, sometimes you're in this, what seem to be very fancy environments, whether that's on a stage or being a brand ambassador. So in the spanning of such different worlds, what opportunities does that bring for you and what challenges do you have to face?
There's a lot of things. I think one of the opportunities of being a chef for me is that I understand the food system from the farms all the way to reaching these fancy restaurants all around the globe and how they get served to people and like these beautiful creations. So it helps me show people that what's on your plate isn't just isolated to that. You're impacting these farmers, these livelihoods, these stories that all go into the food on your table, and what a miracle it is that this alchemy of soil, water, and air and sunlight all combined creates these recipes for you. Because I noticed that there's this huge gap between consumers and producers these days that we want to close. And it helps them make more conscious choices as well in the future of how sensitive they are to the sourcing of their ingredients. And of course, speaking publicly helps tell these stories of resilience, and not just resilience, but all of these disasters, which are the reality on the ground, and of these cultural stigmas that we want to end. So it helps spread awareness to more people, especially young people, to get into agriculture and actually build solutions, not just agriculture, but really food systems as a whole. And I think on another side of it, it helps build awareness for the stories of these farmers that are experiencing all of these different issues, because I think that their voices are generally underrepresented on big playing fields and discussions, where usually the focus, if you think of environment, you wouldn't exactly think of agriculture because it's a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. But it's opening the possibility that this could be an avenue to solve a lot of these issues in climate change, because we are also people who are heavily affected by them, by the impacts of climate change. Even if agriculture is considered unsustainable, maybe it could actually help become a solution.
Mm. And you mentioned a couple of times story and storytelling, which I also work with a lot in the programs that I run, because I just think storytelling is so central to how we bring other human beings on board and share and exchange with one another. So how do you use storytelling, and how have you developed your capacity to weave it into the work that you do?
Well, I think that now as well, where so many stories are kind of clouding the internet, it's really important to make the information that's going on the ground available to more people, but in a meaningful way that doesn't take advantage of their stories, or, like just use their stories for the sake of tokenism, that, oh, this is just represented here because their story is being told, but actually build change, because there are realities on the ground that have never been told internationally. And there are a lot of pieces of knowledge that can be woven into stories that would make it to general audiences, that makes it easy for them to understand, oh, what's really going on and what can we do in a more step-by-step practical way to actually help these people. And it puts like real faces to an issue. Instead of talking about data and statistics and numbers, you're actually humanizing the problem and showing that this is a very real issue to these families, and that this is what you can do to change it through these stories. And it's not just consuming stories for the sake of, oh, I heard about this story and that's about it, but, oh, I heard about the story and this is what we can do to help.
Oh, very nice. And you do a lot of public speaking, and I was interested to know if that's something that always felt very natural to you, or is it a skill that you've really had to sort of work on? And if so, how have you gone about that?
Oh, public speaking. I've always been kind of pushed into the spotlight because of being on a television show to actually speak publicly. And if you look at the very earliest videos I did, I'm still until this day very shy, and I was always quite shy. But over time, I learned to actually speak up and learn that my voice mattered, because if I don't speak up and if I don't use my voice for something greater and I have all this platform, then it's really a waste. So I learned how to maximize those platforms to make something out of it. And public speaking, it doesn't come naturally, but over time and a lot of practice and a lot of feedback as well, and critical feedback from people, and making all these crazy blunders on stage in front of a group of people. I think it taught me some valuable lessons in public speaking. I think that it's a good skill that people should learn, not just public speaking, but communication in a way that's meaningful, that conveys urgency, and that is very genuine and more humanized. Because, of course, not everything should be performative, although part of public speaking is being able to perform quite well so that people understand and get the message well and are engaged. But it's not just the performative side, but it's also the authenticity and the meaningful side of public speaking that's much, much harder to cultivate, especially when you don't feel like you're talking to someone one-on-one, you're talking to a huge audience. I think that was really challenging to learn, but it's something that is an ongoing learning process for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had the same experience. And I think I read over the weekend, I don't know if you've ever heard of this book called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And I really enjoyed it because I think she's obviously a shy, introverted person naturally, and has learned also to kind of public speak in, as you say, a way that's not performative, but is really about using your voice towards a purpose. And that's actually how most introverts can tap into their voice, is when they know the bigger purpose behind what they're doing. So that was really nice book. I don't know if you've read it, but I really enjoyed it.
Oh, it's on my reading list. It's on my shelf, but it's still wrapped because I haven't opened it up yet. Now that makes me want to read it.
Yeah, I found it really nice, especially if you grow up shy and introverted. I think it makes you feel the value in that, maybe for the first time in a very extroverted world. So, yeah.
And I think the preparation for kind of shy, introverted people, it makes you really think about what you have to say. And you make sure that what you say is meaningful and it cuts through the point that you want to say, because it's not something that comes naturally to you. So when you do finally find that chance to speak, you want to make the most of it, and you want to make sure that it has the biggest impact, because it has to be worth it because you took that risk.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of risk, it strikes me that a lot of what you've done has taken courage. It's taken courage to try and potentially fail and try again. So what association or relationship do you have with this word courage, and how do you foster it and work with it in your life?
Well, for me, not to be like too much of a preacher, but I'm quite spiritual as a person. And I always take courage from the knowledge that I have a creator who stands behind me, and that everything I do has a greater purpose than myself, and that I'm not isolated, that there are these interconnectivities, and there's a lot of people that share that knowledge and hopefully can relate to these experiences. So that's one of the things that really give me courage. But on another level of it, I think that, I've come to realize that failure is really part of the process. It's not something to be afraid of, and it's not something to avoid. Yes, it's best to prepare so you don't fail, but if you do fail, then that's fine. That's great. It's only considered failure if you never learn from it, because if you learn from it, then it's a lesson. So understanding that you are inevitably going to fail, because we're all humans, we're all imperfect, being able to take that risk and actually prepare and have those plan Bs. And, it's calculated risks, because if you're an introvert like me, or you're someone who understands that there's definitely going to be a chance for failure, you're going to have to find a way to pivot after that and make the most of that failure to do something better out of it. So that, I think my relationship with courage is, I never thought of it as courage. I just thought of it as having no aversion to failing, and understanding that failure is an opportunity to do something even better, or to learn from it so that you can actually strengthen yourself. It's kind of like scars. If you cut yourself, your skin becomes stronger, or if you burn yourself enough, your skin becomes like hide, and then you're ready for the next thing. And it's upgrading to bigger and bigger challenges, and understanding that, you're going to have bigger and bigger risks, but it's okay if you fail.
Spoken like a true chef. You were pointing to your arm as you were talking about burns. Have you had a few of them in your career?
Not a few, maybe a lot. I think I've went through like the blood, sweat, and tears in quite serious, literal manners.
Yeah, particularly as a young one, right, in the kitchen, I can imagine.
Yeah, too much idealism and too many risks in the kitchen, and too many experiments has probably led me to more burns than necessary.
But probably some delicious outcomes as well.
Yep, it made the best dishes.
Yeah. Lovely. So as you have learned from all of these experiences and some failures along the way, how's your understanding of leadership changed? let's say, over the course of the time that you've been running the Cacao project?
When I was a chef, right, and your idea is of those Gordon Ramsay kitchens where like people are shouting at each other, and I have this it's like a boss idea of leadership. And then when I got into the farming industry, it softened me up a lot more because people were much more welcoming and happy. And I realized that those kind of tough leaderships aren't always the standard for everything. So I learned that becoming a leader is also learning from the people that you're helping and kind of talking to them meaningfully and knowing that everyone is actually supposed to be a leader within their sphere. So there's so much that I have to learn, and there's so much that I could still improve upon. And I'm not necessarily the leader as in the main thought person that knows everything. Being a leader means that I understand where I lack things and being able to find the people who could teach me or lead in that part that I don't know as much in. And it was actually really valuable because I would learn from a lot of the elder farmers here and how they farm and how they used to farm or how their grandparents used to farm. And they taught me about natural pesticides. They taught me about natural fertilizers and how they do things traditionally that aren't traditionally taught in, say, courses in agriculture. And then now there's a building movement of regenerative farming. And I notice a lot of the patterns that those elders have told me are kind of like parallel to those courses in regenerative agriculture and how people are finding ways to make the food system and farming more holistic. And so I realized that these people are actual geniuses in regenerative agriculture. It's just a matter of giving them the platform to speak up and teach about that, or teach us more young people about what we can learn from them and reviving those bits of knowledge. So really, it's not the traditional idea of leadership here. It's more of being a partner with everyone and learn. And it's a mutual learning process rather than just like, oh, you need to do that or this, or I know everything and I'm the authority. It's not just being the authority. It's understanding that everyone has authority and you just have to find those people and create those spaces that they feel safe to share that.
Oh, lovely. So I was wondering if there are any questions you wished people asked you in these settings or things you want to talk about that you're like, nobody ever asks me about that.
I think one of the things that I would hope to talk about as well is women in farming, because traditionally food systems are well known to be a male-dominated industry, whether it's in a professional kitchen or whether it's on a farm. It's usually the stereotype is that a farmer is a man or an executive chef is a man. You notice that if it's non-professional, like they would say, if you're a gardener or if you're a home cook, then you're probably a woman. And I found that quite ridiculous because the moment that it becomes a career, it's considered male, but if it's not a career, it's considered female. And so people have used that to kind of discriminate against me and say, oh, you're just gardening, you're not really farming, or oh, you're just a home cook, you're not really a chef. And I think those are the conversations that women need to kind of talk about, is how there are plenty of women who are in these industries that are amazing leaders with so much knowledge, but it's easily undermined by, again, cultural stigmas that make them think that it's not so great. And many women, as a result, suffer with imposter syndrome and all of these different things in agriculture and food systems. That's just really tragic. But some of the most brilliant people that I've known in agriculture and farming and even food are actually women. So hopefully that builds more representation for women in food systems. And it's why I really appreciate this podcast, because I get to reach out to people who are like-minded in a similar community who might have had these experiences and would have something to relate to.
And you have had the chance to be on so many of these panels and in so many discussions. So have there been any women in those environments that have really stood out to you, that have really inspired you or surprised you in some way?
Oh, I think it's all of the women who are leading within sustainability, environment, and food systems. I think one of them is, looking up to them, one of them is Inger Anderson, who's currently the executive director of UNEP. And, she's this woman who's in environment. She's really efficient. She does these amazing things in her own industry and has amazing accomplishments. And as well as Dr. Agnes Kalibata as well. It's brilliant how she's leading dialogues and a lot of conversations in food systems. And I really look up to them. But there's also the young women who are leading the sustainable food systems movement right now at UNEP, who I consider friends, like Pramisha Thapalia and Lana Waijanet, who are young women who are about my age and are absolute powerhouses when they speak and have such great knowledge. So it's really great to look up to people like that and hear similar stories that I can identify with and relate to.
Lovely. I can imagine, given the breadth of work that you've done, the visibility that a lot of it has had, that there are many, many demands on your time from all different directions. How have you learned to manage that, to set boundaries and to say no when it's necessary?
I think that's something I'm still working on. I think it's been a challenge. Year 2020 kind of blindsided me because I realized that all of these speaking engagements come one after the other. And it was a challenge to continuously make different speeches of new original content every single time when you probably do 3, 4, 5 a day. And I realized that it was taking up more time than I wished it would. So I learned that I have to prioritize and I have to really align my message. And also, as you mentioned, set those boundaries. It's still something that I'm learning because, in the traditional format, you would probably have one public speaking engagement every week or so. And now it's probably at least once a day because of it's more accessible. So with accessibility, you have a bigger reach, you have huge audiences, and that's wonderful. But also you have to start learning that you have to manage your time better. So usually I set public speaking engagements in the mornings or to the evenings on certain days. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, I have days when I choose not to at all and say, these are the days that are non-negotiable, that I have to do what I do, either rest or work on my work. And these are the days that I can't speak. And usually with online engagement, I try to avoid speaking for, say, 90 minutes because I find that that's really long and audience engagement is quite short. So I tell people that if I speak, I'd lessen it to 15 to 45 minutes because then you have a much more meaningful conversation because you cut down to the chase and people are still engaged and interested. So it's a matter of that. It's either limiting the time or saying not now, but maybe on these days it would be more ideal. But that's what I know so far. So if anyone does have tips, please do reach out to me and let me know.
Constant journey for all of us, right? To not only learn the tips, but implement them. Yeah. Especially when you're so passionate about what you do. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So this podcast is called The Grateful, and I like to ask all of my guests, what does living a great and full life mean for you?
Oh, that's a good question. I think for me, living a great and full life is really being a steward to the creation around us and being able to even just change one person's life for the better so that they can learn to be more grateful and appreciate nature and all the resources we have and use it to maximize the resources and help someone else too. So to really live a great and full life is to cultivate an environment of respect, of honor, and to lead a life of integrity and stand for values that are meaningful and positively influence everyone else around you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Grateful Podcast. If you liked it, then please go ahead and subscribe and share it with a friend. And I would love to get your questions answered here. So if there's something that you would like explored on this podcast, just send me an email to podcast@thegrateful.com and I'll do my very best to get your questions answered here on the show. Music in this episode came from Blue Dot Sessions.